My name is Margaret Lane. I am 68 years old, a retired seamstress, and a widow for over 20 years. I spent my life raising 2 children alone after my husband passed, working nights and weekends to make sure they had more than I ever did. I thought that meant I had a place in their lives, a permanent seat at their table. I was wrong. It happened 2 weeks before Christmas, in my daughter's living room, with the tree already lit and the scent of cinnamon candles in the air. Emily stood by the mantel, her arms crossed, her posture tight. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her gaze was fixed on a small chip in her perfectly polished nail. "You won't be joining us for Christmas," she said. Her tone clipped, almost rehearsed. "It's only for family." Only for family. I felt the words land in my chest like a cold stone. My fingers tightened around the scarf I had knitted for her, a deep red wool I'd worked on for months. The yarn scratched slightly against my palm as my hands trembled. I could see the faint quiver in my knuckles, but I didn't loosen my grip. I lifted my eyes to hers. Emily's were the same hazel shade they'd been when she was 10 and begged me to stay up late on Christmas Eve to watch the snow fall. But there was no softness in them now, just a wall. I smiled, not the warm kind I used to give her, but the kind that says, "I understand more than I'm letting on." "Understood," I said. My voice was calm, even gentle, and that seemed to unsettle her more than if I'd argued. I turned and walked to the door. The air outside was sharp, the kind that steals your breath before you can take it. My boots crunched against the frozen driveway. Behind me, the glow from her living room spilled out onto the porch, but it didn't touch me. I drove home without turning on the radio. The streets were lined with houses wrapped in twinkling lights, families visible through the windows, moving in warm, golden rooms. My own house sat dark when I arrived, the porch light flickering. Another thing I'd been meaning to fix but never had the time or money for. Inside, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I hung my coat, set the red scarf on the arm of the couch, and made my way to the kitchen. On the table sat my sea blue ceramic mug. Emily had given it to me years ago when she was still in college, before her life became too busy to call me unless she needed something. I filled the kettle, listening to the water hiss as it heated. The mug was warm in my hands when I poured the tea, but it didn't reach the cold inside my chest. I sat at the table staring into the dark liquid and let the question rise. If I am not family, then what am I to my own daughter? The tea grew cold before I took a sip. I set it down and looked around my small kitchen. The peeling paint, the uneven tiles, the fridge held shut with a strip of duct tape. I had been sending Emily and her husband $2,600 every month for 5 years to help pay for their mortgage, sacrificing repairs, vacations, even new clothes for myself. I never asked for gratitude, but I thought it bought me a place in their lives. That night, I slept restlessly. The wind rattled the windows, and I woke twice from dreams I couldn't remember. When I finally got up, the pale winter light was seeping through the blinds. I shuffled to the kitchen, wrapped my cardigan tighter, and switched on the kettle again. My phone was on the counter, screen dark. I tapped it awake, and there it was. 34 missed calls. Emily. Daniel. 2 numbers I didn't recognize, all from last night and early this morning. I set the phone face down without listening to a single voicemail. The kettle whistled. I poured the water into my mug, the steam curling toward my face, and took the first sip. Outside, a thin layer of frost covered the garden, catching the morning sun like glass. I let the warmth spread in my chest. Something in me had shifted overnight. And though I didn't know exactly what I would do next, I knew this and the rules had changed. The morning after those 34 missed calls, I wrapped my hands around a warm cup of tea, and the steam carried me back to a December when Emily was 10, and our world felt small but generous. Snow trimmed the fences like lace. The plows had not come, so the street looked forgiven. We lived in a second-floor walk-up that clicked and sighed in winter. The heater rattled, the windows fogged, and still the apartment felt like a lantern in the dark. I had finished an early shift at the sewing floor. The pads of my fingers were tender from the needle, but my chest felt light because my daughter was waiting with a grocery list written in shaky pencil. Apples, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a last line that said, "Please check for stars." She meant the tiny white freckles on the Granny Smiths that, in her mind, meant sweetness. I bought the prettiest ones and tucked them into my bag like treasure. When I opened the door, she slid across the linoleum in sock feet and saluted me with a paper crown cut from red construction paper and stapled too tight. She announced that I was the Queen of Christmas and demanded a bow. I bowed so low the crown slipped over my eyes. She laughed so hard she hiccuped and clapped her hands. The apartment smelled like laundry soap and the faint metallic breath of the heater. A strand of borrowed lights winked behind the thin curtains. I hung my coat, rolled up my sleeves, and set the apples on the counter. We cooked in a rhythm that did not need explaining. I peeled long ribbons that fell in curls. She cut careful cubes and examined each piece for seeds, as if a gem might be hidden there. When she measured sugar, she leveled it with the back of a butter knife and grinned at the scrape on glass. I added cinnamon. She closed her eyes and said it smelled like warm wood and clean blankets. I told her good pies are patient pies. She repeated the phrase as if it were a spell and tapped the bowl to help the sugar settle. We rolled the crust. The pin creaked like an old door. She dusted the board with flour and left a white handprint on the front of her sweater. I almost brushed it away. I did not, because she looked proud, wearing the mark of work. We tucked the apples into the pie plate, dotted them with butter, and lowered the top crust the way you set a blanket on a sleeping cat. While the pie baked, the window fogged. I wrote Merry Christmas backward with my fingertips so we could read it from the street. She copied the letters, smudged them into a cloudy heart, and declared that the window was breathing. The radio hummed low carols in the corner. We wrapped the few gifts we could afford on the living room floor. I cut paper into neat rectangles. She taped with enthusiasm. Nothing was square, but everything looked loved. We strung popcorn and cranberries for our thrift store tree. The timer rang. The pie came out bubbling at the edges, the kitchen filled with a sweetness that felt like forgiveness. We each took a small slice and blew across our forks. She burned her tongue, shook her head quickly, and insisted it was perfect. She declared it the best pie in Washington. I told her the secret was giving the sugar 1 extra minute to think. She promised to remember and asked if we could stay up and watch the snow all the way to midnight because she was certain you could hear it fall. We turned the lamps down and sat beneath the faded quilt I had mended until the stitches mapped the fabric like rivers. The streetlight drew a pale circle on the road. Within it, the flakes drifted like ash from a kind fire. Emily tucked her toes under my leg and traced the blue veins on the back of my hand. She said my hands looked like rivers. I told her they were. Rivers that always knew the way home. Before midnight, she slept with the paper crown crooked in her hair. I carried her to bed and stood in the doorway, listening to the soft whistle of her breath. The pie cooled on the counter and our small home smelled like cinnamon in safe places. I believed then that there would never be a Christmas without me beside her. I believed that love, once proven, had a permanent seat at the table. I folded the quilt, washed the knives, and set the kitchen in order the way I liked the night before a holiday. Years later, when she was in college and working weekends at the bookstore, she called to say she had found the perfect thing for me. I told her she did not need to buy anything. She said that was not the point. She came home for winter break with a simple sea blue ceramic mug wrapped in tissue and tied with twine. She said it looked like the ocean she wanted to see one day. I ran my thumb along the rim and felt the slight ripple of glaze. The cup sat in my palm as if it had been waiting. We brewed tea that night. She lifted her mug toward mine and said, "To patient pies and brave mothers." The words were playful. They landed in me like a promise. I keep that mug on the shelf where the morning light finds it first. In winter, when steam curls from the surface, I hold it and hold the memory with it. the apples, the radio, the soft weight of a child asleep on my shoulder. I used to think there would never be a Christmas without me beside her. I used to think love, once proven, earned its place forever. I know better now. Knowing does not make the memory smaller. It makes it clearer, like a needle pulling two pieces together. One side is the girl who believed snow could be heard. The other is the woman who learned to listen to herself. And in that clear place, I set the cup down, breathe, and continue. 15 years ago, before the mortgage payments and the polite but distant phone calls, I had a choice that could have been the beginning of something just for me. My oldest friend, Irene, called one spring evening with a voice full of light. She had finally saved enough to take the trip we had been dreaming about since we were girls. 3 weeks driving across the United States, no strict plans, just the two of us starting in Washington and ending at the Atlantic. She had maps already marked with the places we swore we would see. The Grand Canyon at sunrise, New Orleans at night, the Bluegrass Hills of Kentucky, a list that felt like a handwritten promise. I was standing in my small kitchen when she told me. The kettle had just clicked off. Steam ghosted upward in a soft curl. My first thought was yes. My second was, how could I? Emily was 7 months pregnant with her first child. She and Daniel were both working then, but she had no insurance through her job at the salon, and Daniel's plan barely covered the basics. The pregnancy had been rough. She had already been in the hospital twice for complications. Her face, when she called to tell me about the last bill, was pale even through the phone. The trip would cost nearly $5,000. I had the money in my savings, scraped together from years of hemming dresses on weekends and taking in extra alterations in the evenings. I had been tucking it away for something special, something that belonged only to me. I had not told Emily about the trip. I had not told her about the savings either. That night, after I hung up with Irene, I sat at the table with my mug of tea and listened to the clock count down the hours until morning. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The fridge humming, the wind tapping at the window, my own breathing. By dawn, the decision was made. I called Irene and told her I couldn't go. I tried to make it sound like it was just bad timing, that maybe next year would work. I heard the pause in her voice, the disappointment she tried to mask. We both knew there might not be a next year. Life has a way of scattering people like leaves in the wind. I hung up and called the hospital billing department instead. They told me the exact amount due. I transferred the funds that afternoon. Emily cried when I handed her the receipt. She thought I had taken the money from my retirement account. She hugged me, her arms still strong around my shoulders, and said, "I don't know what we would do without you, Mom." I didn't tell her the truth, that I had traded my one dream of seeing the country for her safety, for her child. I told myself mothers are supposed to do these things, that no one needs to know the exact cost of love. I never told Irene the real reason either. She sent me a postcard from Nashville, a photo of a street lit in amber glow. On the back, she wrote, "Wish you were here. The music is as good as we imagined." I kept that postcard in the drawer with my sewing scissors for years, looking at it sometimes when the house was quiet. It reminded me of two parallel lives, the one I was living and the one I had set aside. Emily's baby was born healthy, a little girl with a loud, beautiful cry. I sat in the corner of the hospital room, watching Emily cradle her daughter, feeling something close to relief and exhaustion stitched together. I thought then that every sacrifice had been worth it, that nothing else mattered but her safety and happiness. I could not have guessed how the years would change that balance, how the ledger between us would quietly fill with one-sided entries. There were moments, in the years that followed, when I would see a photo of the Grand Canyon on a magazine cover or hear a song from New Orleans on the radio, and a small ache would flicker in my chest, but I would remind myself of that hospital room, of Emily's tired smile, and it would quiet. I did not resent her. Not then. This is the truth no one knows. It lives in the spaces between what I gave and what was seen. I never expected repayment. I never wanted her to carry guilt. I believed love, given freely, was enough to bind us through anything. But standing in her living room this year, hearing her say, "It's only for family," I felt that old decision shift inside me. For the first time, I wondered what might have been if I had said yes to Irene instead. For the first time, I realized that giving everything without boundaries does not guarantee you a place in someone's life. Some truths, once spoken even in your own mind, cannot be unlearned. The years after Emily's daughter was born should have brought us closer, but they did not. What began as a slow drift widened into a gap I could feel in every clipped message and every delayed reply. At first she called often, sometimes twice a week, just to tell me something the baby had done. But those calls became less frequent. Soon they were replaced with short texts sent at odd hours. "Can you send it early this month?" Or, "We're running short on the mortgage again." No greeting, no photo of my granddaughter, just numbers and urgency. I told myself she was busy, that she would call when things settled down. They never did. I tried calling her instead, but more often than not, she let it ring into voicemail. When she did answer, her tone carried the distracted hum of someone scrolling through something else. I could hear the faint clicking of her laptop keys, the muffled sound of a TV in the background. "Sorry, Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" More often than not, she didn't. The invitations that once came a month in advance, with a touch of excitement in her voice, now came last minute, if at all. One Friday evening in October, she texted at 5:43 p.m. "We're having dinner tonight if you want to come." I lived 30 minutes away. By the time I read the message, I imagined the food was already on the table. I didn't go. I told her I had plans, even though my plans consisted of reheating soup and reading alone at the kitchen table. When I did see her, it was usually because she needed something. Help watching her daughter when the babysitter canceled. A loan for a surprise car repair. The requests were often dressed in urgency, framed as emergencies only I could solve. I always said yes. The habit had become reflex, the way some people reach for a seatbelt before the car starts moving. Daniel was no better. His calls, when they came, were purely transactional. He once rang me at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, not to ask how I was, but to say, "We're a bit short on the property tax this quarter. Can you cover it until we get the bonus?" His voice was smooth, practiced. He didn't even try to make it sound like anything but business. I agreed because it was easier than asking why they couldn't manage their own bills. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the way their lives seemed to have space for everything but me. They posted photos of family barbecues I wasn't invited to, birthday parties I didn't know about until I saw the balloons in the background of some other picture. When I asked Emily about it, she would give a small shrug, as if it were nothing. We just kept it small. You know how things are. Yes, I knew how things were. There was one afternoon last spring when I tried to tell her I missed her. We were standing in her driveway. She had called me over to help rearrange the garage, but mostly I stood by while Daniel stacked boxes and she sorted through seasonal decorations. I said it gently, almost apologetically. "I don't see you much anymore." She didn't look up from the box of string lights she was untangling. "We've been swamped, Mom. Let's see how things look next month." Her voice was light, but the words felt like a closed door. I started noticing patterns. The calls came before bills were due. The invitations arrived when they needed a babysitter. The warmth that once lived in our conversations had cooled into something brittle. Even the thank yous felt mechanical, spoken as if checking a box. It dawned on me, slowly and then all at once, that I had become a kind of bank account with a heartbeat. They knew I would be there, that I would say yes, and so my presence required no thought, no care. I was convenient, dependable, and invisible. The realization did not arrive with anger, not yet. It came with a quiet, heavy clarity, like the first time you see the tide pulling away from the shore, and know it will not return in the same way. I began to pull back in small ways. I let a call go to voicemail. I took an extra day to answer a request. I stopped offering before they asked. These changes went unnoticed, which only confirmed what I suspected. By the time December arrived, the space between us was wide enough to hold the truth I had been avoiding. I was not a priority in their lives. I was a resource, not a relationship. And though part of me still hoped they might see me for more than what I provided, another part knew that hope was a thread wearing thin. It was only a matter of time before it snapped. The realization arrived without thunder. It settled like frost along the edges of my thoughts. I had become a line item on my daughter's monthly budget. That evening, I pulled the metal box from the hall closet and set it on the kitchen table. Inside were 5 years of bank statements, rubber banded by season. The paper softened at the corners from being handled and refolded. I spread them out in tidy rows, a quiet calendar of my choices. $2,600, withdrawn with perfect punctuality, month after month, year after year. More than $150,000, gone from this house and sent to theirs. I brewed tea and let it sit beside me while I calculated. I totaled the columns twice. The act steadied my breathing. The steam rose and disappeared. The tea cooled. The sum refused to move. I could see my compromises hiding under each figure. The roof I patched instead of replacing. The new glasses I postponed. The coat I kept wearing after the lining gave out. I tried to remember the last time Emily asked how I was sleeping. Memory offered nothing at all. I opened my notebook and wrote the total at the top of a clean page. Beneath it, I printed a sentence with slow care. I'm no longer financing a seat I am not allowed to occupy. The words looked stern. They looked like a promise. I read them once softly, like testing a key. The air in the room shifted. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of my card. A recorded voice thanked me for calling and warned me that the call might be monitored. I entered my account number. Plastic keys clicked under my thumb. A woman answered. She said her name was Dana and asked how she might help today. I told her I needed to cancel an automatic transfer that paid an external mortgage. She asked for verification. I provided each answer in a steady tone, as if reciting a prayer I had practiced for years. She found the transfer quickly. She read the amount aloud, $2,600. She read the date, the BAWA, 15th of every month. She asked whether I wished to cancel effective immediately. I looked at the papers spread like wings across my table. I looked at my sea blue mug cooling beside my elbow. I thought about the way Emily had said the word family, crisp and exclusive, as if belonging could be narrowed by taste. I said yes. Dana paused. I could hear the soft travel of a mouse across a pad, the measured pattern of typing, the practiced breath of someone concentrating. Then it came through the phone. A click so small it sounded like a latch settling on a jewelry box. She said the transfer had been canceled. The status would update online within the hour. Nothing would move on the 15th. She asked if there was anything else. I thanked her. She thanked me. The call ended with a gentle tone felt lighter than I expected. I set the phone down and listened. The quiet had changed. It felt less like absence and more like room. I stacked the statements and squared the edges with the side of my hand until the paper made a tidy thump. I slid the bundle back into the box and pressed the lid until I felt the spring catch. The small ceremony steadied me. It felt like signing my name to a boundary I should have drawn years ago. I stood at the window. Frost filmed the garden beds. A sparrow hopped along the fence and shook its feathers against the afternoon cold. Inside, the kettle sighed. I lifted the mug. The tea was warm enough. I drank it for the comfort of swallowing something that belonged only to me. Fear did not arrive. Relief did. Cautious at first, then sure, like blood returning to a sleeping hand. I pictured shingles stacked on a pallet, a new water heater humming, a train ticket to visit Irene, a map spread across a table with no one to approve it but me. I wrote the date in my notebook and added one final line. Today I chose to be my own emergency contact. I underlined it once and closed the cover. The house creaked the way old houses do when they are settling. So was I. When the phone buzzed across the table, I let it buzz. The sound passed through the room and faded. I inhaled slowly. For the first time in a long while, the air tasted like mine. Morning light spread thin across my kitchen table. It made the wood look clean and a little unforgiving. I woke without an alarm, reached for my phone, and let the screen bloom against the dim room. 34 missed calls stood in a stack that looked like a ledger. Emily, Daniel. 2 office numbers, repeats that pushed past midnight into dawn. I did not open a single voicemail. I turned the phone face down beside the kettle. The house held the quiet that follows a hard decision, not empty, more like settled. I filled the kettle and watched the first bubbles gather on the metal. The porch was silvered with frost. A crust of bread waited on the railing where I had left it for the birds. Sparrows arrived in their brown jackets and got to work. Hop, peck, tilt, as if a small economy depended on our crumbs. The sight steadied me. Life, it seemed, continued on the scale that fit it. The kettle sighed. I took down my sea blue mug, breathed in the comfort of a fresh tea bag, and poured. I carried the cup to the chair by the window, where the light gathers even in winter. The first sip moved heat into my chest and loosened something rib-tight and stubborn. The phone buzzed once and slid a little on the table. I did not reach for it. I broke the heel of bread and tapped the railing with my knuckles. The sparrows scattered and returned in a flutter that made the frost lift like sugar. One bird, bold as a question, hopped to the step and looked up at me as if I owed it a line. I raised my cup in a small salute. Outside and inside, things were simpler than yesterday. A knock came soft and familiar. 2 quick taps, a pause, a third as gentle as a fingertip on a sleeping cat. Helen. I opened the door to her quilted jacket and a paper sack breathing ginger and molasses. She tilted her head toward the kitchen with the casual permission of an old friend. "Come sit," I said. "The kettle remembers how." She laughed and set the bag on the counter. Ginger cookies still warm. She breaks them in half so you never feel like you are taking too much. We sat by the window while the sparrows auditioned for the role of morning company. She slid the larger half to me and kept the smaller, a kindness she never mentions. We ate in a silence that did not require work. When she finally spoke, she kept her eyes on the porch. "I saw Emily last night," she said. "She came up your walk around 9. She held her phone. She did not knock." "How long did she stand there?" I asked. "Long enough to look like she could, long enough to decide she could not," Helen said. She brushed a crumb from her jacket. She left like someone who had almost remembered where home was. I looked at the turned-over phone, its rectangle of quiet. "There are 34 calls," I said. "They are important to her. They are not urgent to me." Helen nodded in that slow way that feels like shelter. "You are allowed to let urgency live where it belongs," she said. "You are allowed to drink your tea while it is hot." We watched the birds finish their breakfast. Helen rested her palm on my wrist, a brief, warm press that felt like a vote. "If you want to walk later, I will be around," she said. "If you do not, I will still be around." She left with the same softness she brought in. The house gathered itself. I picked up my phone, looked at the list without opening anything, and nodded to the evidence that last night had not been quiet for everyone. The calls looked like weather on a map, clusters, gaps, a storm that had chosen a path around my address. Frost glittered along the porch boards. The sparrows shook feathers and settled on the railing like notes on a staff. The neighborhood breathed an ordinary peace. I opened a note and typed a line so I would not forget when the afternoon turned ordinary. I am choosing the pace of my own breath. I folded a napkin around the last cookie, fed the sparrows the final crumb, and rinsed our cups. When the phone buzzed again, I let it buzz. The tea was good. The light was steady. The morning, for once, belonged to me. The knock that afternoon was not Helen's gentle rhythm. It was a hard, hurried fist that rattled the stained glass in my door. I opened it to find Emily on the step, Daniel behind her, and his mother at the walk in a fur-trimmed coat. Emily's cheeks were high with color. Daniel's jaw was set. The older woman's mouth was a thin line. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" Emily said, stepping past me into the living room. She paced, stopped by the window, and turned. "Do you understand what you've done?" Daniel followed, careful not to touch anything. His mother lingered near the threshold. "We had a system," Daniel said. "You disrupted it without notice." "A system," I repeated. I closed the door and rested my palm on the wood. "Is that what we call it now?" His mother lifted her chin. "When families make financial commitments, they honor them," she said. Emily's voice cut through. "The mortgage is due in 3 days. The transfer didn't go through. The bank said you canceled it. Why would you do that to us?" I watched light slide across the sea blue mug on my shelf. I let silence settle until the room found its edges. "Because I am done paying for a place I am not welcome," I said. "This isn't about Christmas," Emily said. "You took it personally, and now you are punishing us." "I took it clearly," I said. "You told me I am not family in December. Today, I behaved accordingly in January." Daniel spread his hands. "Let's not mix feelings with finances," he said. "If you needed to pause, we could have structured something. But canceling without consulting us is irresponsible." His mother said, "It reflects poorly. People talk." "We will be known as the couple whose mother cannot be relied upon." I did not raise my voice. "For 5 years," I said, "I transferred $2,600 on the 15th, over $150,000 in total. I patched my roof, wore a coat with a torn lining, and postponed new glasses so the numbers would add up. No one asked whether that was sustainable." Emily's eyes shone. "We counted on you," she said. "We trusted you." "No," I said. "You counted on my silence. You trusted my habit of yes." I softened my tone. "If I am not family, I will not pay for a home I cannot step into. If I am family, I should be treated as more than a transaction. Either way, something changes today." Daniel let out a laugh. "You would put your daughter at risk to make a point." "I will let my adult daughter find her balance," I said. "I am not making a point. I am drawing a boundary." I faced Emily. "You told me it's only for family. Hear me now. If I am not family, I have no business funding your mortgage. If I am family, then you know where the table is." Thematic echo, steady as a drum. "If I am not family, I do not need to pay for a house I am not allowed to enter." His mother exhaled. "This is unbecoming," she said. "Women of our generation handle matters discreetly." "I am," I said. "In my living room, not yours, with the door closed." Emily's shoulders sagged, then lifted. "We could lose the house," she said. "Is that what you want?" "What I want is respect," I said. "What I need is air." I walked to the door and opened it wide. Light spilled onto the rug. "I am not yelling, I am not crying. I am telling you the terms of being in my life from now on. You can sit and talk like people who care, or you can leave and decide what to do next." No one moved. The spoon in the sink chimed. Daniel looked to his mother, then to Emily. "We should go," he said. "We need to talk to the bank." Emily looked at me, a dozen things flickering that did not become words. I saw the child under the woman. She turned now. Daniel guided her toward the porch. His mother passed me last. She did not meet my eyes. "Mom," Emily said from the steps, "will you answer if I call later?" "I will answer when there is something to answer," I said. "When the conversation is about us, not about transfers." They went down the walk together. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt with a click that sounded like a key returning to its pocket. The house exhaled. I stood a moment, then I dried the spoon and set the sea blue mug back in its place. I learned long ago that people rarely see themselves as villains. They believe their choices are justified, necessary even. That was true of Daniel, and it was true of his mother. Daniel came from a family that measured success in straight lines. Degrees earned, jobs secured, houses purchased before the age of 35. His marriage to Emily was something he displayed with the pride of a man who had chosen well. But that pride was always tied to image. Every photograph had to be composed just right. Every holiday had to look curated. I could see it in the way he straightened his tie before opening the door to guests, in the way he rehearsed his smile in the reflection of a darkened window. For Daniel, the mortgage payment I sent each month was more than money. It was the invisible scaffolding holding up the life he wanted people to see. His co-workers, his friends from college, the neighbors. They all saw a man with a perfect home, a stable family, a wife who didn't have to worry about bills. If they ever learned that it was his wife's mother keeping that roof steady, the story would change. And Daniel could not let that happen. Pride can be heavier than debt. His mother, Lorraine, was a different sort of careful. She'd grown up in a world where reputation was the currency that bought you a seat at the right tables. To her, I was not the sort of woman one built alliances with. I'd married young, worked retail when times were tight, and stayed in a modest house instead of chasing bigger ones. I knew the look she gave me, polite enough in company, but with a small pause before she answered my questions, as if she needed to translate them into her own language before responding. It wasn't that she hated me. I don't think she even thought about me enough for that. But in her mind, I didn't fit the narrative she'd worked so hard to create for her son and his wife. Emily had married into a higher rung, and Lorraine intended to keep her there. That meant Christmases that looked like magazine spreads and guest lists that matched the family's standing. It also meant that someone like me, a mother with calloused hands and a wardrobe more functional than fashionable, could be quietly excluded without a second thought. In their eyes, this wasn't cruelty. Daniel believed he was protecting the image that kept their social and professional lives running smoothly. Lorraine believed she was protecting her family from any perception of lack, but those beliefs left no space for what I had given, year after year, without asking for anything but a place at the table. I think about one evening last summer, before the December conversation that broke the thin thread between us. We were all at a barbecue in their backyard. I had brought my sea blue mug with me, an old habit when I travel anywhere, and set it by the grill while I helped Emily carry dishes. When I returned, I saw Lorraine standing near the table, moving glasses around for symmetry. She picked up my mug, hesitated, and set it behind a stack of plain white cups. It wasn't malicious, but it was telling. My mug didn't match the picture. Daniel noticed, too. He didn't put it back where I'd left it. He simply handed me a white cup filled with water and smiled like nothing had happened. In small ways like that, I began to understand. My place in their lives was conditional on my ability to blend in, to disappear when the scene required it. The day I canceled the mortgage payment, I knew I was pulling more than money out from under them. I was removing the quiet insurance Daniel had against failure, and I was removing the unspoken proof Lorraine had that her son's household could carry its own weight. I imagine that's why they reacted so sharply, not just from financial panic, but from the fear that the image they'd curated could crack. Understanding their motives doesn't soften what they did to me, but it does make it clear that, in their world, I was never truly part of the family circle. I was a supporting beam hidden in the walls, important but invisible. And when a beam stops carrying the load, people notice. They just don't always notice the years it spent holding everything up. Silence is not absence. It is a choice, and that week I chose it like a tool I had finally remembered how to use. My phone lived face down on the counter, a small black stone I refused to skip across my day. Calls stacked in tidy rows, voicemails multiplied, texts arrived with previews designed to hook my thumb, email subject lines bloomed with titles that sounded like alarms. Important, please respond, time sensitive. I poured tea instead. Every morning began with heat and water, kettle, steam. The soft weight of my sea blue mug. I spooned leaves, waited for the first rise of fragrance, and stood by the window while sparrows argued over crumbs on the railing. I trimmed an apple and dropped the seeds into the compost. I rinsed the board under a bright ribbon of water. The kitchen widened into a usable quiet. On Tuesday, Emily sent a message that started with Mom. She rarely used the word like that. She wrote that the bank needed confirmation, that this was a misunderstanding, that we should talk. I watched the notification fade. She knew I had canceled the transfer. She knew why, whether she liked the reason or not. Instead of replying, I pulled on my gloves and went outside. Winter asks for simple tasks: trimming dead stalks, sweeping the porch, shaking the rug. I brushed frost from the garden stones with the back of my hand. Small moons appeared. The gesture felt like erasing a mistake line by line. I clipped the lavender to its woody heart and promised it spring. The air pinched my cheeks. My lungs turned the cold into something bright. My phone sat inside on the counter. It could learn patience. Daniel tried a different approach. He wrote with tight politeness. He used phrases like moving forward and short-term arrangement. He suggested a temporary loan. He offered to add a modest interest rate to be fair. I read his email once and closed it. I made soup instead: onion, carrot, celery. While it simmered, I mended the tear in my winter coat, guiding the needle through the wool with the same care I once gave my customers' hems. Lorraine left a voicemail. Her diction was crisp. She said she regretted the tone of our last meeting and hoped I would reconsider in light of the bigger picture. I went to the shed and oiled the hinge that had been complaining since fall. The screw accepted the driver. The metal learned to glide again. Some things move when you turn them gently. Some refuse and tell you who they are. By Wednesday, the messages blurred into a chorus. I checked my phone at noon and at 5, like a worker clocking in and out. I read everything. I replied to nothing. The discipline was not anger, it was rest. For years, I had reacted in real time to other people's emergencies. Now I measured my hours by different needs. Laundry rinsed and hung. A letter to Irene folded and stamped. A list of roofers to call when the thaw came. My life, even small, could be fuller than their alarm bells. In the evenings, I walked with Helen. We took the long way to admire the few yards where winter did not cancel color: red twigs, yellow grasses, the stubborn green of rosemary. I told her my plan: save 3 months of what I used to send, replace the porch light, schedule the health checkup I had delayed. Helen listened with her feet keeping pace and her mouth quiet. Thursday brought a letter from the bank addressed to Emily and Daniel. I recognized the format: a notice about the loan, a dry murmur of consequences. It was not my emergency. I slid the envelope under a magnet on the fridge. The paper looked harmless. The timing did not. I kept my distance today. I baked cornbread because the house felt cold, and the oven is a kind heater. When the phone rang during the golden middle of the bake, I let it ring. The timer and I had an agreement. Power sits differently when it is quiet. It does not parade. It does not demand applause. It is the calm hand that turns the cup upright, the voice that says no once and does not explain. By Friday evening, the calls had thinned to texts. Emily wrote that she wanted to see me, that she was ready to talk. I wiped the table, set my mug in its round of sunlight, and decided I would answer tomorrow. Silence, kept with care, had returned the room to me. I intended to live in it. Helen knocked on Saturday afternoon and invited me to dinner with her family. Nothing fancy, she said, roast chicken and a salad Sophie liked because the croutons were garlicky. I almost said I was tired. Then I heard my own voice accept. She squeezed my forearm the way women do when words might tip a cup and spill everything. At 6, I crossed the street with a loaf of cornbread wrapped in a towel. Helen's porch light glowed a steady butter yellow. Her door opened before I could knock. The house smelled like thyme and lemon. Her son, Mark, carved in the kitchen. His wife, Alina, set plates while Sophie folded napkins into triangles. They greeted me without surprise, as if I belonged to a list they reviewed every day. "Seat of honor," Helen said, pulling out a chair that faced the window. A small place card waited there, my name in careful pen. I had not seen my name on a table in years. She noticed the cornbread and made space in the center. No one shifted it aside for symmetry. Mark asked how I liked my chicken, dark meat or breast, crispy skin or not. Alina slipped a dish of olives beside my plate because Helen had told her I loved them with chicken. Sophie climbed onto the chair next to me and whispered that she had practiced a magic trick. She could make a grape disappear with a napkin and patience. I promised to be amazed. When we sat, Helen touched my wrist. "We light a candle for the people at our table," she said, striking a match. "Tonight, that includes you." The flame caught. The glass chimed faintly when she set it down. It felt like step one of coming back to myself. Dinner moved with the ease of people who learned how to pass things without ownership. Mark offered the platter to me first. Alina poured water before wine so I would not feel pressed. Sophie told me about the book she was reading, A Lighthouse, a girl who believed storms could be navigated if you listened for the bell. I asked if the bell was loud. She said, "Not loud. Exact." Her answer fit into a place inside me that had been waiting. Conversation drifted to small neighborhood things, a stray cat that adopted Helen's porch, the maple that would need trimming come spring, the new baker at the corner shop who dusted lemon bars with too much sugar and would learn. No one asked about money. No one calibrated their tone to manage me. When someone asked about my week, it was to hear about frost on lavender, cornbread baked for warmth, a hinge that had finally stopped complaining. After we ate, Alina brought tea. She did not ask what cup I preferred. She reached into the cabinet and took down a sea blue mug that looked almost like mine. "We found this at a yard sale," she said. "It seemed like the right color for good news." She set it in front of me without ceremony. The handle fit my hand. The glaze had a soft ripple that matched the one on my own. I lifted it. Something unclenched between my ribs. Helen passed a plate of honey and lemon, said it was a house rule that tea deserved options. Mark asked if I still mended clothes. He had a jacket that needed rescuing from a stubborn seam. I said I would look at it. Sophie performed her magic trick and failed delightfully. The grape reappeared on her lap. She called it an optimistic grape. The table laughed in a way that did not ask permission. When I stood to help with dishes, Helen shook her head. "Guests sit," she said. "Family too, but tonight you are both." I sat. My throat tightened, not with pain, with recognition. In Emily's house, I had learned to make myself small so the room could match the picture in someone else's mind. Here I was, an ordinary size. I could breathe, and the air did not rearrange itself to correct me. Before I left, Helen wrapped pieces of chicken for my Sunday sandwich and tucked them into a brown bag the way my mother once did. At the door, she said, "We like seeing your light on at night." Sophie's hand slid into mine for a quick squeeze, a child's vote of confidence. I stepped into the cold. The porch light held steady. Across the street, my house waited. Not lonely, only quiet. I carried the bag and the warmth home and understood the difference between blood and the people who truly want you at the table. Sunday afternoon, I carried Helen's leftovers across my threshold and set the bag on the counter. The house felt companioned, the quiet no longer pressed. I warmed a plate, turned on the old radio, and poured tea into my sea blue mug. Outside, winter gave the garden a clean outline. Red twigs, pale sun, a sparrow steering with one bent feather. My phone lay face down on the table. Today, I owed no device my pulse. A little before 3, Sophie crossed the street in a knit hat with a bobbing pom-pom. She knocked twice and leaned to the glass. I opened the door, and a pocket of cold rode in with her grin. "Mom says I can borrow you for an art emergency," she announced. "I'm making a poster about people I admire, and I need glue that behaves." "I have the polite kind," I said. "It minds the corners." She hoisted a scuffed folder and a veteran stapler. We sat at my kitchen table. She unpacked images, a lighthouse, a violin, a woman mending a bright square into a quilt, a pair of running shoes, a jar of honey. "These are the keepers," she said, tapping each before peeling off her mittens. We sorted the pictures into tidy islands. When she ran out of room, she made room by scooting an elbow and trusting space to appear. I handed her a glue stick. "We respect the corners," she repeated, ceremonial as a judge. We worked in a hush that felt like concentration's favorite music. The radio found a summer song. She hummed. I trimmed a stray edge. The house relaxed. After a time, she pushed back her chair and looked at me with a gaze too steady for 8. "Can I say something that might sound too big?" she asked. "Try me," I said. She drew a breath like a swimmer at the end of the dock. "I wish you were my grandma." She said it plain, the way children label the world so it will sit in the right spot. I laughed, quick and bright. Heat lit the backs of my eyes. My hand found the rim of my mug because I needed to hold something that would not move. "That is a generous wish," I said. "It might not fit in the living room." "We can put some in the hallway," she said, practical. Then she dug in her pocket and unfolded a narrow slip of paper. I learned how to say it another way. "But Margaret, I wish you were my grandmother." She pronounced each word with care, balancing the sentence like a tray of water. The words crossed the table and settled between us with the softness of a bird choosing your shoulder. I did not cry. I let my eyes water and let the room stay clear. I placed my palm over the paper, a small pledge. "Thank you for trusting me with that," I said. "It belongs to me now, the way your magic trick belongs to you, even when the grape refuses to disappear." She grinned, relieved. "Grapes are honest. That's their problem." She took a sip of water and surveyed the poster. "We need one more picture, someone pouring tea." We did not have such a picture, so we made one. I set my mug on a square of blue paper. She traced the circle. I cut a neat handle. She glued it near the lighthouse so the beam would keep the steam company. She smoothed the last edge and patted it twice, the way Helen pats bread. "Does it look finished?" she asked. "It looks like a room with a light on," I said. She packed her folder, then hovered in the doorway of a thought. "If you want," she said, "I can sit on your porch sometimes when you drink tea. I can be the person who says, 'ah,' when it tastes like a good idea." "I would like that," I said. "We can listen for the bell in storms." She saluted with a mitten. "See you, sea blue lady." She hopped down the steps and crossed the seam where our yards meet. When the door closed, the house did not feel smaller. It felt stitched. I slipped the folded paper into my notebook and wrote the date beneath it. My phone blinked on the table. It could wait its turn. I washed our glue-sticky scissors and left one clean cup to dry. The afternoon settled into place. Not heavy, exact. Somewhere a sparrow knocked frost from the railing. In here, my mug kept its warmth, and my chest did too. A sentence had landed in my life and taken root, and I intended to water it. By March, the snow had thinned into patches, like scraps of an old quilt the season was reluctant to fold away. I stood on my porch with a list in one hand and a hammer in the other. The roof line over the steps had sagged for 2 winters now, and I decided it was time to stop stepping around the problem. I hired a local carpenter for the heavy work, but I handled the sanding and painting myself. Each stroke of the brush felt like giving the house a new sentence, one that started without apology. When the last coat dried, I set a row of clay pots along the railing. Into them, I pressed the beginnings of spring. Lavender for loyalty, marigold for resilience, pansy for thought. The soil was cool in my hands, but it yielded easily. I watered each plant and pictured the blossoms filling in, bright enough to greet any passerby without asking who they were to me. One afternoon, while clearing out the corner of the closet where boxes go to forget themselves, I found the envelope with my savings ledger. Years of sending money elsewhere had kept this envelope thin. Now, it was fat enough to fold with purpose. I opened my laptop, went to the airline's website, and typed a name I had not said out loud in years. Irene Wallace, my friend from college, now living in Oregon. For 20 years, she had invited me to visit, and for 20 years I had said someday because someone else's needs always came first. I booked the ticket for late May, when Oregon's roses would open, and sent her a message. I am finally coming. She replied within minutes. I'll meet you at the gate. No questions about why now, no scolding about why not sooner. Just joy, pure as spring rain. Helen noticed the change in my step before I did. Your porch smiles now, she said as we shared a pot of tea one cool morning. Sophie had drawn me a postcard of a lighthouse with a teacup for a lantern. It sat propped by the kitchen window, catching the first light. Inside, my sea blue mug remained on its shelf, exactly where it belonged. I had stopped using it every day. It was no longer the cup I clung to when the house felt too empty. It had become something else, a marker of a chapter I could revisit without living, inside it. Some mornings I still reached for it, not out of habit but by choice. I could cradle it without feeling the weight of all the winters it had witnessed. Preparing for Oregon became a quiet celebration. I bought a sturdy suitcase, the kind with wheels that glide instead of complain. I tried on my good walking shoes, the ones I'd been saving for years, and decided they deserved real roads. I called a roofer to inspect the house while I was away. He complimented the fresh paint on the porch and said the structure was solid. I told him I was solid too. One day, Emily sent a short message. I hope you're well. I read it without bitterness. It was not an apology, but it was not nothing. I chose not to reply right then. My life was busy with planting and packing, and I had learned that answers given too quickly can steal from the present. The morning I planted the last marigold, Sophie wandered over with a packet of sunflower seeds. These grow tall, she said. They'll see over the fence. She knelt beside me and pressed the seeds into the soil with small, certain hands. When you're in Oregon, I'll water them. It was the kind of promise that stretches across a season, steady and patient. As April leaned into May, the porch filled with green. I would sit there in the evenings, a book on my lap, listening to the neighborhood wind itself down. Sometimes Helen would wave from her kitchen. Sometimes Sophie would sit beside me and narrate the shapes in the clouds. The air smelled of thaw and things beginning. I knew there would be other winters, other phone calls I would let ring or choose to answer. But I also knew there would be summers in Oregon, seeds that grew tall enough to greet me when I came home, and mornings when I chose the sea blue mug simply because it matched the sky. Freedom, I had learned, was not about leaving everything behind. It was about deciding what to carry forward and what to set down. The mug stayed on its shelf. The ticket to Oregon stayed in my purse. And I stayed in my own life, fully, like the porch under its new paint, ready to face whatever weather came next. Sunday settled softly into the house, and the porch smelled faintly of paint and damp soil when the phone rang. I almost let it go quiet. Then I saw Helen's name. Her voice was bright, practical, familiar. Come over for dinner this Sunday, she said. My family wants to see you. I could hear dishes being stacked and Sophie laughing in the background. I said yes without the old apology in my throat. The word fit, simple and right. I stood at the window with my sea blue mug and watched the sun slide low. The tulips I planted in March were open to the light, red, yellow, and the shy purples that look bruised until dusk makes them brave. The sky turned the color of ripe peaches. A train sounded far off, like someone clearing their mind. I smiled because the evening did not ask me to prove anything. It simply asked me to arrive. On Sunday, I carried a salad with roasted carrots and mint across the street. Helen's door was open to warm air and the clatter of plates. Mark was basting a roast. Alina set a second glass for water because she remembered I liked to choose. 2 of their cousins had come by with a pie. A neighbor dropped in with bread still warm from the oven. No one asked who I was to them. They had already decided. Dinner was easy. Voices rose and fell like a tide that knows the shore. When someone asked about Oregon, I told them about the ticket tucked into my purse and the map Irene would spread on her kitchen table. Mark lifted his glass to first trips taken on time. Alina asked about trains through the Cascades. Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder and said lighthouses are bravest when storms forget to be polite. I felt entirely included. After dessert, we stepped onto the porch. Evening gathered in the trees. The street carried the soft hush of neighbors choosing lamps. Sophie watered the new sunflower bed and told the seeds to stand tall when they met June. Helen touched my elbow and said she had something small. She opened her phone and read, "Sunday dinner at 6. My family wants to see you." I felt the copy of the message like a blessing that arrives early. Back at my house, I washed the salad bowl and listened to the faucet's steady line. A voicemail from Emily waited. Her voice was careful. She said she hoped I was well and that she would like to talk when I returned from Oregon. I stood at the sink and let her words be what they were, not enough and not nothing. I did not call back that night. The tulips outside held the last gold of sunset without rushing. I set my sea blue mug on the shelf and laid my suitcase open on the bed. Into it went walking shoes, a sweater Irene once admired, and a book with a pressed leaf for a marker. I printed my itinerary and clipped it to the front pocket. In the mirror, I looked like a woman packing for a life that belonged to her. The house seemed to approve. The floor did not creak. The air waited kindly for tomorrow. At dusk, I stepped outside and leaned on the fresh rail. The tulips held pools of color like small lanterns. Wind moved through them with the hush of turning pages. A jay crossed the yard with bossy wings. A jet traced a pale seam overhead. I breathed in paint, earth, something green that had not revealed itself yet. I smiled because the view asked for nothing except my presence. I whispered a promise to show up for my own life and listened as the garden believed me back. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, carry this story with you. Remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Family is the people who truly want you there.